Burkina Faso has just detonated a financial earthquake. President Ibrahim Traoré has launched a brand new African currency backed by gold, cobalt, and oil, and completely cut off from Western control. Why would a leader risk everything, his position, his nation's stability, and even his life to release such a currency right now? This is not just another headline buried in Africa news. It is a turning point that could redraw the global map of money and power. For decades, African nations carried the symbols of independence, flags, anthems, and constitutions, yet remained bound by a silent chain: foreign monetary control. Traoré has chosen to break that chain in a single daring strike. In the days ahead, the question will not be whether Afro money exists, but whether it can survive the storm already gathering against it. The outcomes could shape the destiny of not just Burkina Faso, but of the entire continent. If you believe the awakening of Africa has already begun, stay with us through this story, because what comes next will shock you even more. When the announcement broke, the shock was not limited to Africa. In Beijing, in Washington, and across European capitals, officials sat in silence. A brand new African currency, Afro Money, had entered the stage without their permission, without their oversight, and without their chains of control. For decades, the United States and Western Europe assumed they would remain the referees of the world's financial order. China, meanwhile, had carved its own influence in African infrastructure and trade. Yet none of them anticipated that Burkina Faso, under the leadership of Ibrahim Traoré, would strike first, launching a gold-backed resource-anchored currency that could not be dictated by Paris, Brussels, or Wall Street. The first reaction was disbelief, followed quickly by fear. Analysts warned of destabilization. Central bankers whispered about risks to stability. But behind the public statements was a deeper concern that belief in Afro money could spread faster than any sanction could contain. Traoré was not naive. He knew the moment Afro money was unveiled, invisible hands would begin their work: currency downgrades, sudden sanctions, disinformation campaigns, even cyber attacks against the digital backbone of the system. These were the very weapons used to destroy past African financial experiments. This time, however, he had prepared a shield. Afro money was not built like the CFA franc, which lived under French oversight. Its infrastructure ran on a decentralized blockchain housed across multiple African nations, untouchable by a single server seizure. It was backed not by promises from foreign treasuries, but by Africa's most demanded resources: gold from Burkina Faso, cobalt from Congo, oil from Nigeria, and uranium from Niger. An assault on the currency would mean jeopardizing access to the very resources the world depends on. To the West, this was seen as bold. For Traoré, it was a matter of survival. Afro money was not introduced as a gamble, but as armor, a currency designed to resist sabotage, to endure crisis, and to embody Africa's refusal to bow. But as powerful as this foundation was, it was only the beginning. The true battle was not in financial charts, but in the hearts of people who would hold this new money in their hands. When Afro money was introduced, people immediately understood that this was not merely a financial instrument. It was a manifesto printed in ink and forged in metal. Every banknote carried the face of a revolutionary figure who had once dared to defy the powers, now panicking at this new currency's existence. Thomas Sankara, the president of Burkina Faso in the 1980s, who fought against the burden of Western debt before his assassination in 1987. Patrice Lumumba, the first prime minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo, who was overthrown and executed in 1961 with foreign complicity. Queen Nzinga, who resisted Portuguese colonialism for more than 3 decades in the 17th century. Nelson Mandela, depicted not as the benign elder of his later years, but as the young revolutionary who was once labeled a terrorist by the same powers that later celebrated him as a hero. The imagery was deliberate. According to the United Nations, Africa is home to more than 1.46 billion people, with nearly 60% under the age of 25. For this generation, these faces were not just pages in a history book. They were symbols of unfinished battles, reminders that independence is only complete when it is defended at every level, including the economy. Coins went even further. They carried maps of Africa without colonial borders, fist-breaking chains and baobab trees intertwined with circuit diagrams. These designs represented both memory and future freedom reclaimed and sovereignty in the digital age. Even the typography was uncompromising. The words Afro Money were prominently displayed in the center, sometimes accompanied by African languages like Swahili, Hausa, or Bambara, substituting colonial languages with the voices of the continent. The reaction was swift. On social media, millions of young Africans posted images of the new currency within the first 2 days of its introduction. Hashtags proliferated, discussions went viral, and Afro Money started trending throughout West Africa. For many, it represented more than just a currency. It was a form of psychological emancipation. Money had always been a reminder of dependence. Now, for the first time, it became a declaration of dignity. For the youth, it was hope. For entrenched elites loyal to foreign systems, it was a threat. The unveiling of Afro Money was not only a domestic event, it sent shockwaves through the corridors of power in Paris, Washington, and Beijing. In France, officials understood instantly what was at stake. The CFA franc, still used by 14 West and Central African nations, binds their economies to the French treasury. Under this arrangement, 50% of foreign reserves must be deposited in Paris, with an additional 20% kept in what are called sight accounts. This system has enabled France to manage liquidity and shape policy throughout a large area for many years. The creation of Afro Money posed a threat to dismantle that entire framework almost instantly. In the United States, anxieties were focused on the dollar's supremacy. The American dollar currently accounts for nearly 60% of global foreign exchange reserves. According to the International Monetary Fund, in the year 2023, a successful regional alternative anchored not in debt, but in resources such as gold, cobalt, oil, and uranium posed a long-term challenge. The fear was not merely economic, it was ideological. What if belief in African self-sufficiency spread beyond the reach of sanctions or currency downgrades? China, despite being a major investor in African infrastructure, with over 150 billion United States dollars in loans and projects since the year 2000, also observed with caution. Beijing's strategy had always assumed Africa's integration into global financial systems. Afro Money introduced an independent, unpredictable element that could potentially operate outside of China's sphere of influence. International financial institutions were just as concerned. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank collectively lent over $22 billion to sub-Saharan Africa in 2022 alone. Their influence often depended on such lending, which came with strict conditions: privatization of public assets, market liberalization, and austerity. A resource-backed African currency reduced the need for those loans and thus weakened their leverage. Within Africa itself, reactions diverge. In cities like Ouagadougou and Bamako, citizens celebrated, chanting that Africa was not for sale. In elite banking circles and government offices, anxiety was palpable. Could leaders still attend to international meetings while praising Sankare's image on their banknotes? Could they embrace Lumumba's portrait while cutting deals with the very institutions implicated in his demise? For ordinary Africans, Afro Money represented pride. For Western capitals, it signified a major disruption. For local elites attached to the old ways, it was a source of danger. At that moment, Afro Money transcended the realm of economics. It became a revolution, a struggle fought not with armies, but with the paper and coins in people's hands. The history of African monetary independence is filled with stories of sabotage. Leaders from Patrice Lumumba to Muammar Gaddafi attempted structural change only to be crushed by foreign pressure, manipulation, or outright intervention. Ibrahim Traoré understood this history well. That is why Afro Money was designed not as a fragile ideal, but as a fortress currency. Its backbone is built on a decentralized blockchain system spread across multiple African nations. This means there is no single server to seize. There is no central bank in Paris, London, or Washington that can freeze the accounts. Every transaction is recorded in real time, verified by independent African data centers, many of which are powered by renewable energy to avoid dependence on imported fuel. This is not a cryptocurrency driven by speculation. It is digital sovereignty secured by the continent's own infrastructure. Beyond technology, Traoré also leaned on Africa's most strategic resources. Burkina Faso alone produces over 60 metric tons of gold each year, making it one of the continent's leading exporters. The Democratic Republic of Congo supplies more than 70% of the world's cobalt, an essential mineral for modern batteries and electric vehicles. Nigeria remains one of the largest oil producers in Africa, pumping more than 1 million barrels per day. Nigeria is among the top suppliers of uranium to European power plants. Afro Money is backed by this basket of resources. Driving down the price of gold alone cannot destroy it. Cobalt, oil, and uranium ensure resilience. To shield against sabotage from within, adoption is tiered. The currency starts among allied nations: Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Guinea, and Chad, whose governments have a shared military or reformist outlook. Expansion to the broader continent will only happen after the system has demonstrated its stability. This approach minimizes the sway of elites connected to foreign banks, who might otherwise undermine the system from its inception. In effect, Afro Money is not merely a new currency. It is armor. It was crafted to endure financial warfare currency downgrades, sanctions, cyber attacks, and capital flight. For the first time in modern history, Africans are attempting to build money that cannot be easily broken by outsiders. Still, survival alone is not enough. A currency, no matter how strong, must live within an economy that breathes. Ibrahim Traoré knew that Afro Money could not succeed if Africa remained fragmented by colonial-era trade barriers. Today, moving a truckload of grain from Burkina Faso to Ghana requires more paperwork than shipping the same goods from Africa to Europe. Tariffs, customs delays, and currency conversions diminish profits and deter trade between neighboring countries. More than 40 different national currencies are in use across the continent. Traders often have to use the US dollar or the euro as intermediaries, which results in losses of both money and time. The African Continental Free Trade Area was signed by almost every nation on the continent. Its goal is to remove tariffs on 90% of goods and to create a single market of more than 1.4 billion people. Yet its biggest obstacle has been currency fragmentation. Afro Money directly addresses that obstacle. Imagine a cocoa farmer in Côte d'Ivoire selling directly to a chocolatier in Kenya. Under the old system, the transaction might involve converting CFA francs into dollars, then into Kenyan shillings, each step adding fees. With Afro Money, it becomes one transaction, one currency, no foreign bank in between. The efficiency is evident, but the more significant impact is on identity. A common currency fosters a sense of shared confidence. Afro Money is also linked with two other liberation tools. The first is a single African passport, which would allow any citizen to live, work, and travel across the continent without visas. The second is a network of continental transport corridors, rail lines, highways, and energy grids that physically connect isolated markets. Together with Afro Money, these tools form the pillars of a borderless Africa. The vision is radical: a continent of more than 1 billion people trading freely with one another in a single currency would create the largest common currency zone in the world by population. It would surpass the European Union not only in numbers, but in natural resource wealth. The civil and political consequences are immense. A unified African economy would lessen reliance on foreign creditors, diminish the influence of elites connected to outdated systems, and bolster the negotiating strength of ordinary Africans. Afro Money is not the final goal, therefore. It marks the start of a larger change, one that calls for unity, resilience, and watchfulness. In Washington, the announcement of Afro Money was met not with celebration, but with silence. Analysts in think tanks, policymakers in Congress, and officials in the Treasury Department recognized the implications immediately. A resource-backed African currency, insulated from Western control, could become the first genuine challenge to the supremacy of the United States dollar in the global South. For decades, the strength of the dollar has been the invisible engine of American power. Nearly 60% of global foreign exchange reserves are still held in United States dollars. Oil contracts, international trade agreements, and debt repayments all flow through the dollar system. This has provided Washington with not just economic influence, but also political authority. Sanctions, for instance, are effective primarily because nations need access to dollar-denominated financial networks. Afro Money could potentially unlock a door that has long been sealed. If African nations can trade among themselves using their own resource-backed system, they reduce their dependency on the dollar. More dangerously for Washington, they may inspire other regions to follow suit. Imagine South America adopting a similar model based on lithium, copper, and oil. Imagine Southeast Asia experimenting with rice, rubber, and rare earth minerals. The dollar's dominance would not vanish overnight, but its grip could weaken. American corporations also have much to lose. Many multinational companies operating in Africa profit from currency instability. They buy African commodities at low prices during devaluations and sell manufactured goods at inflated exchange rates. A stable, resource-supported Afro money would eliminate that benefit. It would compel corporations to conduct business on Africa's terms. For average Americans, the effects might seem remote, but they are tangible. Retirement funds, investment portfolios, and global stock markets are tied to the assumption of dollar supremacy. A shift in Africa, even if gradual, could ripple outward, reshaping financial stability worldwide. The dilemma for Washington is clear. To ignore Afro money is to risk losing influence. To attack it openly would only confirm its necessity in African eyes. Thus, the United States finds itself watching, calculating, and waiting for the next move. Beyond the United States, Afro money has sparked unease across global capitals. In Europe, particularly in France, the threat is existential. The CFA franc has served as the bedrock of French sway in Africa since 1945. Its demise would signal not merely the forfeiture of financial advantages, but the symbolic conclusion of France's status as a colonial benefactor. The European Union, on a larger scale, is concerned about the precedent. The European Union more broadly fears the president, a continent of more than 1 billion people, creating a common market independent of European oversight. China's reaction has been cautious. While Beijing has invested more than 150 billion United States dollars in African infrastructure since the year 2000, it never expected Africa to demand equal footing in currency as well. Afro money could complicate Chinese trade strategies, yet it could also offer new opportunities, especially if China chooses to recognize and integrate with the new system. For Beijing, the question is whether Afro money becomes a competitor or a partner. Russia and Turkey have shown quiet interest. Both nations have been subjected to Western sanctions in recent years. A new African currency, shielded from Western financial networks, could offer alternative trade pathways. Moscow, for example, has already established its own financial messaging system after being cut off from the global SWIFT network. Partnerships with Afro money could deepen those channels. For the global South, the possibility is electrifying. Afro money's existence suggests that smaller economies, long trapped by dollar or euro dependency, may one day imagine their own alternatives. It is a psychological breakthrough, proof that resistance to the financial order is possible. The global ripple effects are immense. A successful Afro money could create the largest currency zone in the world by population, surpassing even the euro. It would rival existing powers not just in numbers, but in resources. Gold, cobalt, oil, and uranium are not merely symbolic assets. They are the essential components of the 21st century economy. However, this vision will not be realized without opposition. The greater Afro money's influence becomes, the stronger the pushback against it will be. Currency manipulation, cyber attacks, diplomatic isolation all remain on the table. The challenge now is whether African nations led by Ibrahim Traoré are prepared to defend their creation at any cost. The true twist in the Afro Money story is not only its economic design, it is its psychological power. Every banknote and coin is a mirror held up to African leadership. When a head of state praises Thomas Sankara while signing a military pact with Paris, Afro Money exposes the contradiction. When a minister lauds Patrice Lumumba's legacy, but quietly seeks loans from the International Monetary Fund, Afro Money turns that act into hypocrisy. The figures featured on the currency are not mere embellishments. They serve as constant reminders of the sacrifices of those who refuse to submit. This mirror presents a challenge that cannot be avoided. Leaders cannot admire Sankara's steely eyes or Lumumba's burning stare without asking themselves, am I upholding their courage or betraying it? In this way, Afro Money becomes a silent but relentless judge. For citizens, the twist is empowering. A farmer in Burkina Faso, a trader in Mali, or a student in Guinea holding Afro Money feels part of a living legacy. It is not a foreign banknote stamped with colonial faces. It is theirs, and belief is contagious. History shows that currencies survive not because of metal or paper, but because of trust by embedding symbols of resistance. Afro Money establishes that trust in a manner that no system backed by foreign powers ever could. The twist is therefore evident. Afro Money shifts from being an economic instrument to a psychological revolution. It compels both leaders and citizens to make a choice. Will they continue the unfinished struggles of Sankara and Lumumba, or will they abandon them once again? The second twist lies in the transformation of Ibrahim Traoré himself. At 36 years old, the youngest head of state in the world, he was once seen as merely another transitional leader. With Afro Money, he has become something more, a symbol whose influence stretches far beyond Burkina Faso. Traoré's decision to launch Afro Money was not simply financial reform. It was an act of defiance against a system that had endured for more than 70 years. Few leaders in recent memory have dared such a step. The last attempts by Patrice Lumumba, by Thomas Sankara, by Muammar Gaddafi ended in blood. Traoré's gamble revives their vision, but in a new era with new tools and with lessons learned from their failures. On the global stage, Afro Money alters Africa's narrative from that of a victim to an active participant. Instead of waiting for aid or directions from foreign capitals, Africa is now proposing its own solutions. This changes how Africa is perceived in Moscow, Beijing, Washington, and Brussels. It is no longer only a supplier of raw materials, but a competitor in ideas, systems, and sovereignty. For Africans themselves, the symbolism is even deeper. In villages and cities across the continent, Traoré's name is spoken alongside those of Sankara and Lumumba. Afro Money elevates him beyond the role of president. He becomes the face of a movement larger than himself, the face of a continent daring to imagine freedom in financial, political, and cultural terms. This is the unexpected twist. A young captain turned president once underestimated now stands as a global icon. The fight is no longer just Burkina Faso versus France. It is Africa against the established world order. The story of Afro Money is not just about currency. It is about dignity restored, sovereignty protected, and the renewal of a continent long compelled to submit. In Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré has proven that leadership is not measured only by age or rank, but by the courage to stand against the impossible. By forging Afro Money, he has reminded the world that freedom is not granted by treaties or approved by foreign banks. Freedom is seized by those who dare to claim it. The vision ahead is larger than one nation. Imagine an Africa where goods move freely across borders, where citizens travel without barriers, and where wealth circulates without passing first through foreign treasuries. Imagine a continent united by a single voice in global negotiations, backed by the strength of its people and the richness of its soil. As Traoré himself has declared, we did not ask for permission to be free. We stood up to claim it. If the spirit of Ibrahim Traoré touches your heart, share this story. Subscribe to continue the journey of an Africa that will never bow again. And may God bless Africa.